Hey, what's up YouTube? Today we're going to tackle the question, which should you use to manage your finances, Quicken or Excel? So which is better? Spoiler alert, my suggestion is going to be to use both. But sit tight and we'll talk through the reasoning and look at some examples. Now, if you're thinking of using either Quicken or Excel, you're likely looking for a solution that provides granular control over the way you manage your finances. There are plenty of easy to use solutions out there that will automatically sync and categorize your financial data, but they tend to lack customization features. So with that in mind, let's quickly talk about the strengths and weaknesses of these two. Quicken's up first. So what is Quicken good at? Well, I'm sure many will argue with me on these points, but as a Quicken user for nearly 20 years, I have formulated my opinions, and here are the top 3 strengths. Quicken is a fantastic system of record for your transactional data. So your checking accounts, your saving accounts, your investment accounts, all those transactions that you have in there on your credit cards. It's a great place to either download or manually input that data and keep track of it. It does, as I said, a very good job at tracking investments and performance over time. So that's the second one. And because of those 2 previous points, it's also a pretty decent place to run a variety of reports on that financial data. So where does it struggle? Well, there's a lot of features, sometimes too many, that just don't quite hit the mark for me. A couple of those are budgeting. To me, it's fairly cumbersome and not extremely flexible. Another thing I find trouble in Quicken is the ability to manage my cash flow. More importantly, forecast my future cash flow based on planned purchases and planned or known spending behaviors. The last point that I struggle with a little bit is around tax planning. There are tax planning tools, but they're fairly static and rigid, and I end up having scenarios that don't fit nicely into that bucket. Like my wife runs a business from home, and I don't track her finances in Quicken, so it creates some difficulty in incorporating those into tax planning. So Excel is next. The obvious pro of Excel is it provides the ultimate flexibility. You can literally do anything in Excel as long as you know how to. But for me, Excel is a choice for a couple of different things, and it's kind of the things that are lacking within Quicken. The first is managing and forecasting cash flow. So understanding how much money I will have next week, the week after, 2 months from now, and at the end of the year. The other thing that I tend to use Excel for and think it does a very good job at is tracking and forecasting my future net worth. Again, you can do this within Quicken, but I find that when you're forward looking, that's where Quicken starts to fall down a little bit. It's really good for looking back in the past, but if I want to understand what the next year looks like, what the next 10 years look like, I find Excel to be a better solution. And then the last one, as you can probably guess, is tax planning. Again, it provides that flexibility to go and create those different aspects or customizations that I require in my tax planning. So Excel is not the best solution for managing transactional data. So think about all your credit card purchases and your checking account register. Managing all those line item transactions in a spreadsheet is extremely cumbersome. And as a result of that, it's very difficult to use Excel to generate meaningful reports without that transactional data. Another downside to Excel is there can be a steep learning curve depending on where you're at with your knowledge of the platform. To get the most out of Excel, you're really going to want to know how to manage spreadsheets, write formula, play with formatting. And if you don't have that knowledge, there can be a barrier to entry. But if you either know that or are willing to learn it, it can be a fantastic tool to have in your arsenal. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. This doesn't help me at all. So let's walk through an example of how you can make Quicken and Excel complementary solutions. I'm going to give you a quick overview about how I use the 2 tools together and get the best of both worlds. For me, this has come together over the course of roughly 20 years. It actually started early on in my career where I actually used QuickBooks to manage a startup business and supplemented that with Excel for specific needs of the business. I took those concepts and applied them to managing my personal finances, and this is what ultimately came out of it. Okay, so let's start with Quicken. As I mentioned, this is where I'm going to track my historical data. As you can see here, I have all of my accounts represented with all of that rich historical transaction data. Now, personally, I update this about once a week. Takes me about maybe an hour and a half. I do it every Saturday morning. Now, everyone will be different, but as a reference, I have roughly 40 different accounts that I track and somewhere between 200 to 300 transactions per month. In our example here, we can see that it is now mid-February, and I've already paid my monthly car payment, my mortgage, and received my first biweekly paycheck. If I scan last month, I can also see that I typically need to pay 3 credit cards and make deposits into my savings and brokerage accounts. All of my spending is done on my 3 credit cards here. A topic for another day, but if you have the discipline and the control to track your spending, it's a fantastic option. I'm not going to get into investments and tax planning in this video, but we'll take a quick look at reporting. The report I use most often is a variation of the income/expense report. This gives a month-by-month view of spending across all different accounts, and it's very useful information. But as I mentioned earlier, this is all looking back into the past. It doesn't really help me understand if I have enough money to cover my future expenses and what my balances will be. Now, as I said, Quicken does have a lot of tools for budgeting and cash flow, and if you like them, great. But for me, this is where Excel plays its role. So let's hop over to my spreadsheet. This is going to be a very quick overview. I can post a video explaining it in greater detail, but that's going to be in the future. The general breakdown is this. The main portion of my sheet is my primary checking account, where I track the money coming in and the money going out over the course of the month. You'll notice that there's a tab for each month down here at the bottom, and we're currently looking at February. Now, this main section is broken down into 4 different segments, one for each week of the month, and then all the planned transactions are listed here, including things like paychecks, loan payments, credit card payments, and deposits into my savings and investments accounts. Below that, I have a section for my credit cards. Now, I know I said don't track your transactions in Excel, and you really don't have to, but I prefer to track them here basically for 2 reasons. First, it helps me control my spending. If I know that every time I swipe my card, it's going to create a little bit of work for me on the back end, well, I tend to swipe it less. And second, by actually reviewing every transaction on my card, I never, ever miss fraud. And I have caught it a bunch of times. So I also set spending budgets per card, and you can see that down here at the bottom. And this helps me understand what money I'll need on hand next month in order to pay these bills in full. The next section over here is net worth. Now, this is a rolling tally of all the accounts and how they compare to the previous month and year to date. We can see in this example, I've added a little over $1,000 to my net worth this month. And I don't attempt to forecast market growth or investment growth on a monthly basis because that's just a recipe for insanity. I do, however, account for contributions to things like 401k. Looking forward, as I open each month's tab here at the bottom, you'll see how this planned income and spending will unfold for the remainder of the year. If I skip all the way back here to December, I can easily see how this all adds up and impacts my net worth. In this case, the net worth increases about 41k for the year. And again, this does not account for investment growth. Now, one useful feature is this low balance field up here towards the top. This will tell me my lowest checking account balance for the month that I'm currently in, as well as for all the months of the year based on changes that I make to the sheet that I'm on. So for example, if we're back here in February and I decide to put an extra $3,000 into my savings account, we can see that at some point in the future, my checking balance will now dip to 221 bucks. So that's too close for my comfort. And this is sort of my quick gut check on, hey, are the things I'm doing here going to have some negative impacts that I may have to go and adjust what I'm spending in the future to accommodate for it. Okay, if you're still with me, thanks. Hopefully this overview is helpful. You can find a link to this spreadsheet in the description below, and please comment your feedback below and stay tuned for detailed videos on this and other topics going forward. Okay, cheers.